Now that the Massachusetts Senate has released its budget proposal following Governor Healey and the Massachusetts House, Beacon Hill is buckling down for weeks of budget negotiations. But unlike last year when the state took in a massive surplus, current tax revenues coming up dismayingly short of expectations. In April, the state brought in more than $2 billion less than it did in April 2022, putting the state hundreds of millions of dollars behind projections for revenue at this point in the year. And less revenue means less funding for lawmakers' top priorities and for Governor Healey's key campaign promises. What's more, the debt ceiling showdown in D.C. has the potential to wreak financial havoc here and everywhere else. So where does all that uncertainty leave the Senate, the House, and Governor Healey? GBH State House reporter Katie Lannan joins me along with Evan Horowitz, the executive director of Tufts Center for State Policy Analysis. Thank you both for coming in. Katie, since it's the Senate's time to shine, can you just identify maybe a couple of the signature ideas in their budget that we didn't see in the budget proposals from Governor Healey and the House?
Absolutely. The big items that they've been touting, which they're pitching as kind of workforce development and equity measures, are a proposal to start making community college free for all students. They want to pilot with nursing students this year, hopefully for all students by 2024 under their plan, and they want to extend in-state tuition at public colleges and universities to undocumented immigrants who graduate from high school here.
The idea of making community college free for everyone, that goes beyond what Governor Healey is proposing, which is making it free, what, for people who don't have a degree who are 20, is it 23?
25 and older. Yep, that's in Governor Healey's budget. That was something the House agreed to, and the Senate wants to go bigger. They leave out some other House initiatives like online lottery, and we don't necessarily see the same details for what the Senate wants to do for their tax relief plan, though they've set aside $575 million for it, a little less than the House.
Is that carve-out a surprise from your vantage point? Because this has been such a hot topic on Beacon Hill going back to last year. Is it unusual that the Senate's eliding those details?
Yeah, I think, we have heard from the Senate president that she definitely wants to do tax relief. She's been talking about that for months, but I think a lot of people expected that the Senate would follow suit with what the governor and the House did and do their tax relief plan in concert with the budget, see those specifics. There is some thinking that maybe the news we had this month about the April revenue shortfall has got them moving at a bit of a slower pace.
Yeah, perfect transition. Thank you for teeing me up. So, Evan, last year, the push for tax relief was derailed when the state took in a surplus and it triggered this law that sent money back to taxpayers.
Gave back the surplus.
And no one seemed to know that that was even a possibility, and it happened anyway. Now we're dealing with these, seemingly to a large number of people, unexpected negative numbers from April. When state policymakers, state lawmakers have this much trouble predicting what's going to happen, is it smart public policy to be talking about $500 million, or in some cases, for the House and the governor, $700+ million in tax relief? Or is that a bad idea?
I mean, I think it's always smart public policy to be thinking about what is the best thing we can do with taxpayers' dollars. And sometimes it's spend it, and sometimes it's give it back in targeted ways. Now, I do think April has made people reflect on whether we can really afford the sort of $1+ billion annual cost of the tax proposals that have come from the governor's office and from the House. And it's probably both a little bit of caution and a little bit of tactics from the Senate side to hold off on their plan for a bit. But I think it makes sense given that, yeah, there's new uncertainty in our tax revenue expectations, and we should plan with that uncertainty in mind.
You may have just offered me a generously delicate on-air correction. The tax relief numbers we're talking about, over $1 billion? Because I had pushing $800 million in my head, but I may be wrong.
So there's a lot of gamesmanship in how these things get presented, but I think the right way to think about it is the full cost of the governor's package is $1 billion a year once it's phased in. The full cost of the House package is $1.1 billion a year once it's phased in. And the Senate actually is being, I think, quite clever in the way that they're presenting this as the same amount of money as the House, but what they really mean is the same as their first phase. So the Senate could come in and say, actually, this is our full package, and it's $600 million, and it's the same as the House. But maybe they mean $600 million every year, whereas the House means 600, then 800, then $1 billion.
Crafty.
Yeah, clever bit of politics. I don't know that that's what they're doing, but it's certainly possible.
Does that ring true to you, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything. We only know that $575 million placeholder is the cost for fiscal year 2024. The House phases in their tax relief plan over a period of multiple years. So that's how you get those kind of mystery numbers. And there's always, different actors on Beacon Hill will talk about the same bill, the same policy with different price tags depending on the situation.
That makes me feel slightly better about my inability to attach firm numbers to these things. Evan mentioned a second ago that people may be backtracking, at least in the Senate, or indicating their ambivalence when it comes to whether tax relief is a smart move, especially if the number is higher at this point in time. Do you have any sense that people either in the Healey administration or on the House side are backtracking in the wake of those April numbers, or are they just kind of staying the course?
They are holding fast. They are saying that this is affordable, that they were expecting a slowdown, that they were expecting some volatility, ups and downs in revenue collections, and that these numbers were planned with that dynamic in mind. Now, that's particularly on the House side. That's why Speaker Ron Mariano says they wanted to gradually build up to that full $1 billion number rather than doing $1 billion in relief all at once to make sure they could afford it. And, I think there's some truth to that for sure, but that they, knew this was not going to be a up, huge revenue year like it really has been. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how much of that is kind of a political posturing and how much of that is this is tracking what they expected.
Well, maybe Evan can tell us, because you're one of the experts, right, who gives state lawmakers guidance when it comes to how much money they should expect is
yeah, I mean, Katie's being judicious. She's a journalist, so there's only so much she can say, and I'm not a journalist, so I can say more.
Excellent.
Which is that I think that the administration, the argument the administration is making, which is they always foresaw this, is implausible. I was there in just January when we were suggesting, as you say, this group of experts, what revenues would look like, and some of us said your April expectations are wrong, and we're never going to hit the numbers. They had an opportunity to go back and adjust that, and they didn't. So to turn around now and say, yeah, we always knew that was unreasonable, I don't think that's right. They missed a window where we were telling them it was unreasonable, and they didn't do anything about it. So, I mean, does this mean that their tax packages are unaffordable? Not necessarily, but I think probably they are too big given the current fiscal picture.
Just to be absolutely clear about this, when you're saying that it's not quite true to say that people anticipated these numbers, that they were warned but they didn't anticipate them anyway, are we talking the Healey administration or the House or both?
Well, it's the administration that sets the monthly benchmarks and well, it's a consensus thing, so all the bodies get together, but really the lead groups here are on the agency and administrative side who are setting numbers.
So hypothetically speaking, maybe since you're not a journalist, you'll be more willing to engage in reckless speculation than Katie can be.
I appreciate that characterization of it. Yes.
If we hopefully this is informed and sophisticated and nuanced speculation, but I think it's reasonable to ask, what if we see numbers in May like we saw in April? What will happen and what should happen?
Actually, we're not going to. What happened in April had to do with a part of the tax system that's called non-withheld income. And there are only a couple months where that matters. April is one of those months. The next month where that matters is June. So the May numbers are not really going to tell us much, but the June numbers are. And it'll be pretty late in the process by then to make changes for this fiscal year, but it'll matter for next fiscal year. And very often we push up right up against the end of the year before we sign a budget. So we could get those, well, it'll be tricky to see the June numbers, but yeah, we're unlikely to see anything meaningful in May.
That wasn't as reckless as I was
Sorry, I
hoping
apologize
for.
for
So try
that.
to ramp it up in your final answer.
Try a different question.
Katie, as I mentioned in the intro, the debt ceiling showdown is ongoing in Washington, D.C. That could either lead to the debt ceiling not being raised, or it could lead to the debt ceiling being raised in exchange for some big cuts that Republicans are pushing. Do you have any sense that as they deal with the other uncertainty that we've been discussing up until this point, are the House and Senate and Governor Healey, are they thinking ahead to what the worst case scenario might look like if bad stuff happens with the debt ceiling or cuts related to it?
I mean, this is another thing that, when Evan's talking about the group of analysts and economists who came in to testify about the budgetary outlook, the debt ceiling questions, at least, were on the radar then. They've been hearing about it. This is certainly the kind of thing that's on the mind of the, budget analysts working in the warren of back offices at the State House. It's not the kind of thing you're hearing about from the people at the podium, right? There's not public messaging going on about it, and they're really sticking to the notion that, or the message, I should say, that the state's economy is doing good, unemployment's low, revenues are elevated, we're, on a steady ship at least for now, that you're not having that variable introduced in the public realm yet.
Evan, am I right that the state gets 20 or 25% of its annual budget revenue from the federal government?
I think it's 1 in 5, so I think it's about 20%, but most of that dedicated to Medicaid. Most of it comes through Medicaid.
Given that, and given the fact that this debt ceiling impasse is going on as long as it has, should people on Beacon Hill be working to anticipate all the bad things that could be happening in less than
There
a
are
month
too many
and
bad things. You can't anticipate
Yeah.
all the bad things because there are so many ways for things to go bad. And I think it's disappointing, but it's sort of futile to worry too much about the debt ceiling because there's not much we can do about it. If folks in Washington screw this up, and they may, and by screw this up I mean allow the government to default on its debts for no particular reason, then yeah, the fallout here will be disastrous for the economy, for the state budget. But we have very little power here. We don't elect any Republicans,
There is that,
right?
yeah.
So we can't pressure local lawmakers. There's just very little that we can do except cross our fingers and hope that they're not as foolish as they seem to be.
And just to be clear on this, is your sense that if the ceiling is lifted in exchange for great big cuts, that'll be pretty bad on the state and local level too, right?
I mean, if it's a package of cuts that looks anything like the Republican House proposal in D.C., yes, that would be quite bad for our state, for states across the country.
Well, then we can have both of you back. That'd be great. All right, Evan Horowitz, Katie Lannan, thank you.
Thank you.